Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to GNG, Gil and Gurpreet's live show. Today's just me and Gil. Gil, it's been a long time since it's just been the both of us.
We've had some great guests, so
Yeah,
we've been lucky, but this is a fun one, just a great topic for just you and me to go through.
yeah. So we are gonna talk about an interesting topic that actually came out of there's an article that I was reading, and then I wrote a post on this. And the comments on those posts were very, I wasn't surprised, but I thought it was worth that me and Gil, we do this topic on our show today about employees not trusting HR. Why do employees don't trust HR? And what can HR do to build that trust and have employees trust them? And who better to kick this off, this segment, than Gil, who is an employee experience expert. Gil?
Thanks, Jafreed. I'm really excited to talk about this. This is a topic that, unfortunately, is not new. The reality is, I was actually just looking up that there was a very famous article from 1998 titled, "Why Doesn't This HR Department Get Any Respect?" And the issue wasn't new at that time. The reality is a lot of why people don't trust HR is the foundation on which HR was built around, personnel supporting the organization. It wasn't built around helping people. It wasn't built around creating great employee experiences. It was built around protect the organization, protect the leader from lawsuits, unions, turnover, whatever it might be. That was the foundation on which it was built. And the outcome of that is that a lot of people have then carried that torch for a long time. I do want to say there is a big caveat about that, though, is that as with HR and as with anything, there is a wide spectrum of what really falls under HR. And there's a wide spectrum of the type of people who fall under HR. I know the cliche is like they're caring people, but there are a lot of people who fell into the HR field that really aren't, that don't actually care. And the other interesting reality is that based on, self-selection and bias and all that, people who would be watching the show, or even people who would be interested in LinkedIn and active on LinkedIn and trying to learn more, would lean toward the more progressive, because they're out there, they're showing interest, they're learning about what it could be. However, the reality is there's a lot of HR people who have no interest in that, who just have absolutely no problems being the, for lack of a better word, pawns of leadership in helping achieve their agenda. And because of this history of HR, that it was on leadership side, it's on the company's side, many HR practitioners have made decisions or been forced into decisions that have caused mistrust. And as a result, there is a broad perception around the field of mistrust that, hey, the HR person isn't on our side. So I like LinkedIn because it's very educational. I meet amazing people. I met you there, I love that. But one of the problems I find with LinkedIn is that because it's not anonymous, it becomes a bit of a bubble. It becomes a bit of a bubble that people aren't going, as an HR director, you're not going to say, hey, this is how terrible my CEO is and how they're tying my hands. Right? They're not most people, because you want to be employable, aren't going to say, this is how horrible my organization is. So one of the things I do to sort of break out of my own bubble is follow different subreddits on Reddit, which is an anonymous social media site. And just on the Ontario subreddit alone, I'd say at least weekly, there is somebody posting something about how, reminder, HR is not on your side. Reminder, don't trust HR, or here's why I don't trust HR. And then there will be thousands of comments of people agreeing with them, telling horrible, horrible stories of what HR has done to them. And so, unfortunately, bad HR or leader-focused HR has been the norm for a long time. The idea of caring about the employee experience hasn't been a priority. Sure, there's the micro level of, the HR person as the psychologist, but ultimately that's not them being control over the employee experience. That's just supporting them once they're in a situation. So that is my long-winded way of saying it's the historical trends that have led us here, that the broad perception is that HR isn't on the employee's side, and then HR has done things that have created the mistrust. One of the biggest things is being absent. Being absent. One of the when talking to HR people who are great and really care about and are positive about the employee experience, they're out there talking to people.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the traditional HR person sits behind a desk and only shows up when there's a problem. That's not everyone, thankfully, but there are large groups of people. There's a reason why broadly the profession has earned that perception. And I'll say it's been earned. It's not a misguided perception. Sure, it's not all HR people, but overall, because of the foundations in compliance and in terms of the focus on leadership in the organization side, it has created behaviors that have definitely created this mistrust.
Interesting, because it's true. I'm not gonna sit here and being the HR person go into defense mode to protect, defend my peer HR. But no, it's correct. My entire HR career, any place I worked, the first thing I had to do was rebrand the image of HR, and the image was always, if you're going to HR's office, you're in trouble. All HR does is hire and fire people. So it's just that negativity around the how people see HR. On the flip side, what a lot of people don't see behind the closed doors is, and there's something I've talked about with Kyle too on his podcast, Rebel HR, and we both openly talked about this, is that a lot of times people don't see closed doors, right? What happens behind closed doors, yes, HR can be advocating for the employees and whatnot, but when the decision's made, it's a united front. Right, you have to have your leaders back. You have to have the managers back, regardless of what happens in closed doors. So in the united front, I have to support the decisions that were made, and my job isn't not to support. I have to support it, but before the decisions were made, I gave my pros and cons, and then once the decision's made, I may not like the decision. I still have to support it. And now, on the flip side, when employees do come to HR, and I've said this to people who come to me and want guidance, like family members, I always say, hey, before you go to HR, I want you to think about step 1, step 2, step 3, X, Y, and Z, because something, depending on what the situation is, like if you're trying to voice a concern against a manager, you feel like you're being bullied, I go, here's what's going to happen. You can voice your concern. Depending on the manager, they can then turn around and be like, I don't want this person on my team. Right? And that's a really sticky situation. And what's HR going to do? Force the manager to keep an employee? You can't really do that either. So hence, yes, the whole bad image of HR. I had a great mentor right from the early year of my HR career, my first boss. And he came from that whole personnel, but he wasn't like that. He was out and about, always going on the floor and talking to people. And because I had a great first boss to show me the ropes around how to build relationships with employees, is to be out on the floor. It is to be seen. It is to not sit behind the desk. And because I had that, I was able to carry that on in my entire career journey of HR. And I think that's where maybe some people are lacking in HR. I can't speak on everybody, but the mistrust does happen. Oh, Gil, you're muted. I see you talking, and
Yeah,
I'm like,
no, I want to pick up on this because I think this is a really key point. Because, and this ties to exactly what I was saying about the history of HR, where it comes from a certain world, and then you have mentors and leaders and managers teaching people this is the right way. So the context for HR leader after HR leader was this same bad way. And it was broken by having this person who taught you, hey, here's a different way of doing it. And it's slow, and it's an evolution to change the people practice from what it was, where it comes from in these roots of not really having strength and being able to impact people's lives positively, to a world where it's something better, but it comes through people thinking differently and then spreading that. So then it was your mentor that taught you. Then you said, hey, this is great stuff. And now you're out there on LinkedIn, on YouTube, on, pushing this message of there's a problem with that old way of doing HR. Now you have the experience and the knowledge to say, hey, I understand why you're doing it that way. I get the world you're coming from, but there is a better way of doing it. But one point I really want to get back to, because I think this is an important one around people trusting HR, is around the rebranding, the reframing, because typically, at least in a large fair percent of the population, employee population, HR means something and it doesn't mean something good. It does. It doesn't mean something good. There's a reason why, the cliche character on The Office was beat up so much, even though he was actually the only one in the office, one of the only ones who was trying to be competent. But that's a different story. But so sorry, I lost my train of thought.
The rebranding of HR.
Oh, the rebranding, exactly. So when, as a new HR person, you're coming in with a weight that you didn't carry with you, that you didn't bring in, whether it be the historical perceptions of the employee population just on their own of HR, and then the historical behavior of HR within that organization. And that you need to then break that. So you were talking exactly about how, you need to change the perception that
you do.
HR is there just for problems. So it's funny because I was kind of chuckled to myself when you mentioned that, because one of the things that I did in my old office when I first took over as director of employee experience is that every single conversation I had in my office, I closed the door. And the reason I closed the door was that if I didn't close it for every conversation, people would notice the conversations where I did close the door, and then they would realize like there was an issue
happening. Yeah.
Whereas, and people were wary of it at first, but people, as I brought them in to have conversations that were to their benefit, they realized, oh, I wasn't there, as a cop. I wasn't there to be punitive. Exactly. I was there to actually help them. There was a little bit of a different history in terms of within that organization, but most people in the company had a longer history of bad HR behind them.
Yeah.
Bad HR behind them. That's what even spurred that post of the HR Outliers post, which is, it's a compliment to be told you're not like other HR people.
Yeah. I've been told my entire career, you're not like any other HR person. And I always at first used to be like, get shocked. But now when I reflect back, there's a reason behind it. And then I look back, okay, what did I do different than my peers before me that were in that role? And I'm going to step back a little bit. I had my first boss gave me the best advice. You know why HR also has a bad image for all these years is because HR was also kind of like the dumping. You know how our last session, Tracy came on and talked about dumping things on HR, right? And that's the case, though. A lot of times managers didn't want to do the dirty work, meaning they didn't want to discipline their employees. Hey, HR, you come and do it. We don't want to talk about this to our employee. Hey, you come and do it, right? So that's how the bad image has come, because a lot of managers all these years have been relying on HR to do their dirty work, so they seem like the good person in front of their employees, right? My first boss told me this. He goes, one advice I'm going to give you, learn from my mistakes, is don't do anyone's dirty work. You're not, because I shouldn't be disciplining anybody that's not my direct report. Like, if you're not my direct report, Gil, I shouldn't be coming in and disciplining you. You don't work for me. I'm not your manager. Your manager needs to take care of that. So because I had that good talk, my boss openly talked about this in my first role in HR, I've actually created those boundaries. So I think HR needs to create those boundaries. Is you can't be doing everything. You can't be disciplining employees that are not your direct report. So especially when I became a manager, if I have a direct report, I can discipline that direct report. But that's it. I shouldn't be disciplining anybody else because they're not my direct reports. So creating those boundaries and the image, it's a funny thing is, but every time I stepped into a different role in a different company, it's sadly I had to rebrand, because you hear things and the image is bad. You can see it when people don't want to say hi to you. They don't even want to come pop into your office. You know what I mean? You start to see things. So the first thing because I had a great mentor, I always, 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 always be on the floor. I don't roll anything out until I have learned everything about the business. I have spent time with employees on the floor, learned about different roles. How does it integrate into the organization for the business to run? I think common mistake people make, and this can be for everybody, but typically HR, they come in and they start policing policies. You shouldn't be policing policy. I hate policies. I talked about this with Kyle too. Like, policies suck. I think a lot of times people fail to understand that we're human beings. We're not perfect. We're going to have moments. So when I stepped into my first HR manager role, the first thing I rolled out was, hey, you need to vent. Feel free to come into my office and just say, I want to have a venting session, and vent it out, right? You don't have to always move into disciplinary action either. You can have conversations with people and to understand the situation, what happened, and then determine, do you need to have like a documentation saying, okay, I'm going to discipline you and it's a verbal warning or whatever. I had this talk with another HR fellow and she was surprised that I wouldn't right away jump into, okay, you're disciplined. No, I'll go, why? You need to have conversations to understand what was the nature behind what happened. Sometimes it's just a small thing can be worked out and out you go, right? So you can't be the police of the company.
I want to step in here, sorry, because I really want to highlight what you just said there about this other individual, that the nature of traditional HR is to blame. Mm-hmm. Is to come in and blame. We need to take action. We need to show we had value. We were part of the situation, and we assigned blame. That's how we showed we were in control of the situation. Whereas you're bringing in a humanistic side, which is, we all have our moments. Sometimes you need to vent. Sometimes you snap at somebody, and that's also, I think, where it ties into what you were saying about being out there. Whereas if you build the relationships, if you understand people as people, not just as, worker XYZ or doing this specific role, but understanding them as humans, you're not going to jump right to that write-up or PIP or whatever it is, which isn't going to go well for anybody. No. If you do that. Whereas if you give them a chance to vent, give them a chance to explain themselves, and understand that a lot of times, it was the environment that led somebody to behave a certain way, the experience people were having led somebody to behave a certain way, then that serves everybody. But the traditional way, and then again, the reason why people don't trust HR is that's the immediate reaction. Mm-hmm. That's the immediate reaction of, oh, somebody misbehaved, they broke policy, and therefore I need to write them up and it goes on their permanent record.
Yeah, and I agree. I've seen this with a lot of HR. Even when I was covering this mat leave contract, same thing with the person I was covering. They were all about policing, and they butted heads even with the director of operation. But I don't, that's not my nature. I don't go in and say, please, right? It's more of, okay, let me hear what your thoughts are. What are you trying to accomplish? Same with the director. We're there for a business goal where we all have the same common goal, is to grow the business, make it thriveful so that we all have jobs as well. So let's work as a team. I've always worked as a team. And with my business units, directors, executives, it's more of, okay, what do you want to accomplish? Let's figure it out. And yes, being that I need to know the law, I have to walk you through the legal component as well. So you know the pros and cons and you can make the best decision for yourself. But trying to always like, please is not going to get you anywhere either. Right? Then you are seen as the bad guy. You are always seen as somebody, oh my God, this person's not going to let us do anything. Just like Tracy said, she wanted to jump into that meeting and they were like, no, you're just going to tell us we can't do it. Right? So then you have that pushback. But if you go into approach, collaborative approach that, hey, I want to listen in and let's brainstorm together and come up with the solution. The problem is, I think a lot of people, unfortunately, a lot of HR people don't think of solutions. They go right into, no, you're going to do this because that's what the policy says. Policies are great. Don't get me wrong. Policies are there to have a structure so you know the do's and don'ts. I see policies as do's and don'ts, but you can't pull out a policy for every situation. You got to have common sense. You got to use some common sense and analyze the situation and work it out. Like, that's why I created the venting session in my office and everybody knew about it. I'm like, hey, you need to vent. You need to, like, we're human beings. We're not perfect. There will be days where we just want to punch the wall. Like, of course you can't punch the wall, but hey, come into my office, because if you let someone vent it out, you will feel better. And you can then perform better. But if you like,
I want to interrupt, sorry, 1 second there, that if you also give them the space to be human for a moment and vent, they're less likely to actually go out and punch the wall.
That's
by treating them like a human, then you're going to actually diffuse the situation. Whereas if you start to a person who's already upset, who's already elevated in their intensity, pointing fingers and blaming them and telling them they're going to be punished, well, now you're just encouraging the wall to be punched. So I think I just really want to point out there of what you're recommending there. Before we start, we have only a few minutes, but I have a tough question for you. Okay. Because you were talking before, and we talked about it last week with Tracy, and today it came up, whereas managers who dump the bad stuff on HR, leaders who dump the dirty work on HR, which ultimately then makes HR lose trust in all of that. What advice do you have for an HR person? Come into a situation, you do exactly what you talked about. You listen for the first while, you're out on the floor. And from doing all of that, you learn that managers don't have the skills or experience in having difficult conversations because it was always pushed onto the HR person in the past. What advice would you have for an HR person in that situation?
Work like a team, right? Ask them, why are they uncomfortable doing it? Why, right? There's always a reason why a manager maybe doesn't want to discipline their employee. Get the reason why, then coach them on how to do it. Walk them through. I've walked through so many managers to executive level on how to discipline employee, or how to, if you have a concern about performance, how to do it. You start with the positive, and then you move into the negative, right? You soften the blow a little bit. And if it's disciplinary, like, first of all, how much discipline does someone need? Is it verbal? Is it discussion? I always go with, let's talk. Do a discussion first. Hear their story out. What's happening behind the scenes? No one just goes crazy at work. It could be something personal. It can be something going at home. And that's why we have employee assistance program, right? So I always coach my managers, my team, the people I partner with on, okay, this is how you do it. This is how, and if you want, I will sit in it. but I'm not going to lead the discussion. I will sit in and be the mediator. And that's how HR should be seen. We're the mediator. We should be mediating two parties' conversations, but we're the middle ground people. So coaching the managers on how to have those tough discussions. And if they lack, as we talked about this last week, a lot of managers and supervisors lack training. Then get those trainings for those managers or employees. And HR is not the best person to train internally. Outsource. I always found so much more valuable in outsourcing because the employee will listen better to a third party coming in and teaching on a different topic. So get the managers trained on how to be managers. Yes, these are not comfortable conversations to have with someone, especially if you're addressing a performance issue. But again, just walking them through talking points on how to do it, and you sit with them for a couple of rounds. And honestly speaking, that's my approach. And it's always worked for me. Someone might out there probably have a better approach than mine. You just have to show them you're a team. It could be with the employee, it could be on both sides, right? Being a team. And it's really hard to have conversations, tough conversations. I've had to had tough conversations even with a team leader who was a little bit being inappropriate with me. And it's not like, it's hard to have those conversations, but in the workplace, you're going to have to make those tough calls. But I would say, you sit down with the manager, walk them through, coach them, and say, I will be with you in the meeting and I will facilitate it. You can be the facilitator of a meeting, but you don't have to be the one disciplining. My best advice to HR is don't discipline any employee that's not your direct employee. That's how you do get the bad rep too. Doing the dirty work for the managers is not going to help you build any relationship with employees.
Amazing advice. I love that. One thing I really want to key in on what you talked about is emphasizing with managers and leaders that you're a team together. Because one of the things that I find in traditional HR structures is that there's leaders and then HR is an other. They're separate. They're not part of the team. Whereas when leaders meet with the HR leader, it's like the HR leader becomes the police at the leadership team table, right? They're the ones looking, are we allowed to do that? Are we allowed to say that? All of these things, instead of understanding that HR is a part of the team, there for facilitation and support. But if you're asking HR to do the job for you, then that's a complete failure of the system. So that's awesome recommendations for an HR person to help overcome that, because part of it is the structure they're put in, and part of it is they are capable of changing certain things. And that's one thing I think that's important that they help change. So that's awesome.
I just want to add a little bit also is, the policing thing. So I worked in manufacturing, and one manufacturing I worked in, it was just all men. So they used to drop the F word. And when I joined that organization, I remember someone was like F, and then they're like, oh, HR. And I'm like, I don't care. It's shop talk. What do I care? If this is how you talk, this is how you talk, right? Like shop, I don't care. Like I'm not here to police F this, F that. But if everyone's using, I'm like, yeah, just be mindful if someone doesn't like it, right? I'm not here to police, and this is the norm. And so again, don't go into a company to change the environment that someone's already used to. Like I'm not saying that don't change some environment, but if it's a shop talk where people just use the F word, I don't care. But that, again, this is just me.
No, I'm with you. See, but I think that's really important, because what it's all about is that your job isn't there to change the culture, to change the behaviors totally from what it was, because there's an existing something that had been working to that point. Now, if you find out in further investigation that shop talk actually makes a significant portion uncomfortable, that leadership is actually against the idea, then it's something to consider. But if the leadership team has no problem with it, and the people on the floor have no problem with it, and like you said, they're respectful of people who don't want to hear it and all that, then you absolutely should not be applying your own beliefs, your own judgment, or best practices to an existing environment. That any change to the system has to intentionally improve it. But that's a topic for another day. As always, these half hours go super quickly. thanks everybody for watching. Thanks, Gurpreet. Anything else you want to add
No,
before we close it out?
To build just like any relationships, to build trust, you have to give trust, and you got to receive trust. You can't just go in and say, trust me, trust me. You have to show to the employees and everybody that they can trust you by being out and visible. You got to be visible.
And don't hold it against people if they have an automatic mistrust of you because you have HR in your title. You can't hold it against people because that's just where they're coming from. It's on you through consistency to prove that you deserve the trust. So awesome.
Yeah, good point. So thank you everybody for tuning in. We'll be back next week, same time, 1:30 on LinkedIn and YouTube and Facebook. So tune in. I think we have a guest, but we'll keep you posted. If you want us to cover different topics, please feel free to reach out to Gil or myself, and we'll be more than happy to cover any HR employee related topics on our segment. So see you guys next week. Bye.
Bye.